Good afternoon. I think obviously one of the challenges in organizing a meeting like this is we really want to share with you as much content as possible. But there's so much valuable interaction that goes on here in the breaks. But I think we have a world of Zoom followers out there waiting for our second presentation. So I'd like to get started and go ahead and introduce our second keynote speaker, who is Beth Hoffman, who is a journalist and now a regenerative farmer. And Beth began her writing career focused on culture and food, producing a radio food series documenting the stories of immigrant women as they cooked in their homes, which was nationally syndicated. Now, 25 years into writing and producing work on food and agriculture, her areas of expertise have grown to include the potential of agriculture and development, the financial viability of farms, and sustainability in agriculture. She has aired and published on NPR's Morning Edition and on their food blog, The Salt, written for The Guardian, Civil Eats, Forbes, and produced work for the News Hour, Latino USA, and The World. Most recently, she has published Bet the Farm, The Dollars and Cents of Growing Food in America. Beth currently works as a consultant on food and communication projects. She speaks about sustainable farming and writes a blog as part of Iowa's Writers Collaborative. She has spent much of her adult life teaching, and most recently as an associate professor in the Media Studies Department at the University of San Francisco. She was a fellow and a co-lecturer at UC Berkeley's School of Journalism, where she also went to graduate school in the African Food and Agriculture Reporting Project, and has traveled to India, Uganda, and Ethiopia to cover agricultural topics. And perhaps most importantly, she is now a beginning farmer on a 570 acre farm in Iowa with her husband, John. The couple raises beef, goats, and vegetables, and forages for mushrooms. So we're really, really lucky to have Beth. So if she would come on up. And this is really the Hoffman Squared show. So actually facilitating the discussion will be our dean, Andy Hoffman. So I think who needs no introduction, right? So anyway, so we really appreciate your contributions.
Thank you.
Thank you, and hopefully everybody can hear us okay.
That sounds
Hello.
great. Hello.
And we are immensely grateful that you've come to spend some time with us.
Thank you.
This is going to be an informal conversation. Beth and I have spoken over dinner last night, and I think first met you through Twitter because it was finding out about your book, reading your book, and then repeatedly telling people about it. Tom did a wonderful introduction. Thank you. When we talk about you and your book, before you came here, I think the framework is here's somebody that was a faculty at USF in audio media. I think media mostly focused on audio, but working with students, working in studying and writing about agriculture and food, eventually packs up, leaves California to go to Iowa, 1 hour outside of Des Moines, with your husband to take over your father-in-law's farm, who had been working the farm for many years, many generations, I guess many decades. And you came in from the outside. So it's such an interesting and unusual journey, but also many of the comments this morning are, we need to think about, what do farmers think? I think Jane said, what do farmers think? We need to get the socio-cultural context of everything that we're doing. And here we have journalist and author Beth Hoffman, who has not only thought about agriculture and food for many years, but now is living the dream.
Mhm.
So I guess I wanted to start out just by asking you what inspired you to write the book.
Well, thanks for having me, by the way. I really am honored to be here, and so many great minds tackling these, very important questions. So my husband grew up on the farm in Iowa on this land. He is now the 5th generation farming this land of his family. We came there, and I guess, and beforehand, actually, he started me interviewing his family members, kind of to document it all, but it turned out to really give me like a very quick primer on the whole family. And I also started interviewing farmers that were nearby, older farmers. And I just kind of very quickly realized that, especially operating on the coasts, I had grown up in New Jersey, but was doing this kind of agricultural reporting from California mainly. I'd lived in Utah as well. But, the storyline is very much about, and if you look at a lot of that journalism, Civil Eats, a lot of the great books that are out there, it's a lot of the presentation about like, here's all the things wrong in agriculture. And there's not a whole lot of information, I didn't feel like, that was really empathetic to farmers and why farmers make the decisions that they make. There's a lot of like kind of discussion about farmers being, the minions of big ag, or like brainwashed, or just kind of, on autopilot, just doing what they're told. But there's a lot of thought about it that goes, into what they're doing. And so I really wanted to present that story about why do farmers do what they do. In large part because I feel really strongly like we can't make any of these changes that people are talking about without understanding why people do what they do. So that was number one. Number two was that as soon as we sat down to try and figure out how to be on the farm, there was this, pivotal moment where we sat at the dining room table with my mother, who's a CPA. And we had kind of just gotten finally, at least with John's dad, figured out okay, we're going to pay this amount of money. And we sat down with her to get kind of the business plan in place. And I just remember getting really cranky in that conversation because I was realizing, it was like, we're going to make what? Like, this is how much money we will make even like after 5 years after all our initial investment. And it just started dawning on me that question of the economics of agriculture and how it really works hadn't been laid out in a forum like this. So those were really I would say the two real drivers of why I wrote this book.
And the title, Bet the Farm, dollars and cents of American farming, kind of consistent with what you're saying. You thought about, the type of debt and the type of uncertainty that farming brings about, and then you went on the journey anyways.
Mm-hmm.
So, I mean, I think for those of you who haven't read the book yet, there was an intergenerational aspect to this, which is oh so common. And you point out in the book that we've got 30% of farmers are less than, 10% are less than 35, and 30% are over 65. And the mean age, I think that the USDA reports of farmers is 57, 58. So, we have a demographic and a generational challenge. So you have the intersection of intergenerational challenges, taking over a farm, whereby practices may not be, your vision, for example, but there's a transition.
Mm-hmm.
But on top of that, you also had a vision about transitioning to different farming practices.
Yes.
Overlaid with the uncertainty that you just mentioned. So can you talk a little bit about what your vision was going into it and how you reconcile that with your present day farm?
Yeah, so the John's dad had grown conventional corn, beans, cattle on this land. He liked to refer to where the farm is as the infertile crescent in Iowa. It might be infertile in quotations because it's still very fertile ground, but not super high corn suitability rating land. And so, he was doing that. And a lot of the book kind of chronicles his story of how, as John's mother actually put it, they just got on that hamster wheel of debt, generally speaking, that it just 1 year went into the next year, went into the next year of trying to get ahead and bringing in these innovations, also in quotations, that were supposed to help get to that economic viability, like had one of the first hot confinement facilities in the state of Iowa, which by today's standards it's like a very small pen of pigs, but they were always trying to get ahead, and in that process getting behind a lot of the time. So a lot of the time they took out the debt, they built the silo, they were going to feed out the cows that way by storing and having their own silage, and then they the whole thing went belly up, and then the next thing there's a cattle, the bottom price, the price drops out of the bottom, and they're all worth nothing, and they can't even pay off the silo. That happened as often as have this new piece of equipment to have greater yields of corn or whatever it happened to be. So right off the bat, with my reporting, I had reported a lot on sustainability, people who were doing different things in California and in Utah. And John, I should say, he grew up there. He left the farm, went to San Francisco and went to culinary school, became a chef, became a wine buyer, was then a butcher for 12 years before we left. So the two of us were coming in with really an enormous amount of knowledge about food and farming. And so, we really, and John was also in San Francisco during the period through the 90s. He moved there, I think, in like 94 or something. He saw organics and food kind of blossom in San Francisco. He saw the great potential of that. And so we didn't really want to come into something where we knew full well how much work we're going to put into it. The last thing I want to do is then just like pile all my stuff together and just ship it out, and it's nameless, it's faceless, it has no point of reference for where this food came from, how it was grown, the pride that was taken in doing it. So we just didn't want to be in that commodity cycle. John's dad, though, was there, and he had been farming for 50 years or whatever at that time. And he saw, especially me, right, coming in. It's like, what does she know about anything, right? I'm a city slicker. I've never worked on a farm. I don't know what I'm talking about. And there's this classic moment, it's in the book, where I mentioned organics to him, and he went out and he got this hoe that was like, had a head that was like this big, was left. And he was like, is this what you want to be doing with your time? This is what organics means. And I was like, oh, you're right. Like, I don't know what I'm talking about. I don't know what's involved. So there was a lot of conversations, a lot of, there's a moment that John was just like, well, that's it. We're not moving to the farm. And the whole thing collapsed, the negotiations. But we did work through it all. Spoiler alert to everyone who hasn't read it. Leroy has just passed away in early January at almost 91. So now it's literally like this new chapter of like, wow, we could do whatever we want. We don't have to get permission. I can get rid of that old baler that has a tree growing through it. Like, we could really clean things up and do something different. So it feels exciting. I hate to say when his passing, but we've really been we've worked through a lot of it beforehand, but now it's a whole new kind of world because John and his sisters own the land.
Yeah. No, I mean, the book is fantastic in its journalistic record, memorializing those conversations and those poignant moments, although the hoe wasn't in there. That, is it in there? I missed that. Yeah, I could see that being memorable. And I think, one of the things you discovered was a lot of the things that farmers were doing, putting themselves at risk, dealing with the uncertainty of seasonality, of, pests, of climatic changes and so on and so forth. It's incredibly challenging, and you walked into that and you could see why. And so the framework that you discussed in the book about why farming is so challenging is that it's actually we're dealing with an agrarian myth, in that not only is there a disconnect between consumers that are eating this great food and farmers that are producing it. Almost we objectify food. We don't think about the farmers that are making it. But there's also a real myth, what you call the agrarian myth and others have called the agrarian myth, about what farming is. And in a lot of ways, the most amazing thing about this book is the book in an aggregate does a fantastic job of telling you what that myth is. But also you also suggest that we need to change the narrative around farming. So could you just briefly discuss how you look at the agrarian myth, the average consumer, and their perspective on what a farmer does day in and day out, and why that's mythic, and how there's actually a roadmap forward, maybe a pathway forward to change that to the benefit of farmers.
Yeah, so I talk about two myths in the book. One is the bigger is better myth, which you could read about. The other one is this agrarian myth. And when we're talking about sustainable farming, regenerative farming in any manner, whatever you want to call it, often that myth, it's a really interesting thing when you think about it. Like, it has its roots in the Jeffersonian vision that was talked about earlier, of farmers being the hardiest, best citizens, all the kinds of things that Jefferson liked to attribute to farmers. But as it's kind of moved along, if you think of this mythology that's really depicted on Instagram, like that's the biggest, if you just go to any farm, right? And people are constantly, oh, have you seen these people? It's got the cutest, it's so cute, it's so flowery, it's so, whatever. It's always families holding hands in the meadow kind of thing, right? And I was like, where are the ticks in that? I'm always thinking. But the problem with that too is that these myths have now come to include things like we're talking about today, in a sense. Farmers are stewards of the land. Farmers nourish our communities. They're the ones who are going to get us out of climate change problems. And if you think about all of that, that's like, I don't know of another job that is saddled with this kind of weight of like, we're saving the world through farming. And what's happened with a lot of farms then is that in this drive to be the cutest, most nourishing, most stewarding kind of farm, is that those farmers, often young, work themselves, they burn out within 5 years. You can't sustain the Joel Salatin style of farming where you're doing 1,000 things on the farm and you've got, the biggest little farm. I like to talk about that. There's a mention of it in the book where, if I just work hard enough to get Mother Nature to step in and sort of take over the ecology of my farm, then I wouldn't have to work so hard. It's just this unattainable goal. Like, if I get the ducks and the snails and the peaches and all of this stuff working just right, and then I've got to sell it for the amount of money that everyone in the community can afford, because I don't want to leave anybody out. I mean, it's just becomes a recipe for burnout. And so the stress level, and you hear, I mean, at conferences and things, you meet all of these young farmers who are trying so hard, and yet at the same time are panicked about student debt, about paying healthcare bills, about, owning a car, or how am I going to get this refrigerated truck to get my stuff to market? Those become the problems that you really have to face.
So we're going to move on. That's a great description, and thank you for sort of encapsulating that. We're going to move on after my next question to audience questions. So I'm giving you a prompt to think about questions you might ask, but
Very
I
professorial of you.
after having made the mistake of not doing that in the past many times. Well, I think you also provide us with some solutions and roadmaps about how young farmers, rather than indulging in self-exploitation and altruism, and which you also describe as one of those psychological costs of farming, but you also provide with a vision. In part, it was a vision for your own journey in terms of how you're going to interact with your community, with the marketplace, with food, distribution network, and so forth. So, given what you know and what you thought about in this book, and what you've experienced on the farm, we want to hear what the farmer thinks about the vision for making farmers more resilient by either in a cooperative form or in other forms that bring on a workforce, that bring on the community, that bring on the individual, the farm, and the community.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, small question.
Yeah, it's a small question. Maybe even just one vision, if that's okay.
Yeah,
that's okay,
yeah. If I had the answer to all of that, that would, I would have the solution to this, which is when I was writing the book, when I pitched it, it was like, I'll lay out the problems and then the solutions will come out at the end. And I got to that second half and was like, I don't really know what to recommend, because there's examples of things that work, but as a system, it's really hard to just like, here's a solution for everything, right? Because there's so many different facets of this. I think some of the things that I talk about in the book, I talk about shifting this paradigm and thinking about things. I looked at it kind of, instead of overall solutions, thinking about the personal, the self, and then the community, and then, or the farm, and then farms working together, and then policy. So in these different stages, there's different aspects of it that could be addressed. The personal part of it was finding support, finding community, like that's been discussed a few times already today, about the importance of culture and of social support. That cannot be, I can't highlight that enough as being a really critical element of this. For us in Iowa, we luckily have several groups, but the Practical Farmers of Iowa, which sounds funny to anyone not working in Iowa, but PFI is like a lifeline for all of us. I mean, it's literally like where anybody who's doing anything different can join in and learn something new. Like you could just be doing cover crops, you could be doing apples, you could be doing anything. And there's going to be another farmer in that group to help support. This is a really great example, is like last fall, we went to fall calving. We lost our first 6 out of 7 calves. It was so stressful and heartbreaking. And we could not get a handle on what is happening to us. And then, the vet was saying things like, well, it's bad luck, and we're like, bad luck, it just keeps happening. What? And so we put out just to the listserv at PFI, we said, this is happening. Does anybody have any information? Is this happening to anybody else? Any recommendations? And it was just this outpouring of support that came back to us. I just can't tell you how that felt. Like it didn't make those calves survive, but it gave us kind of this feeling like we're not alone. We're not alone in this. And people were sending us resources of great vets, or, you know, somebody from ISU spent a lot of time talking to us about forage and, you know, all the different things it could be. And people just saying, I don't raise cows. I don't know, but just know that we're with you. We're thinking of you. You know, I can't imagine how heartbreaking this is. And so, you know, I think like those kinds of narratives, they have to be included in the thinking about all of these things. Because what I see happening, and I just heard Secretary Vilsack speak, and this whole like discussion of supporting smaller farms and local farms and all of this stuff. But what I still see happening is just like program. So it's like little thing, you know, like, oh, I could sign up for cover crop. I could sign up for this. And then I get money for just this. It's prescribed very narrowly. I've got to do X. My seed mix has to be just this. And then, you know, I'm on the farm kind of by myself with my program. But there's not paradigm.
Holistic.
There's not outcomes based.
Okay.
And so, you know, I think that to tie this together, I tend to ramble, sorry.
No, it's great.
You know, going from that personal, the support and the culture to all the way to policy, there's ways to tie these things together where the communities are able to utilize the support systems within themselves. Like, it doesn't make much sense that if I want to have wetland restoration, it's going to be the same prescription for somebody in Oregon and somebody in Florida. I mean, that should be very different, and it should be crafted at a local level with certain specifications. But then I am, you know, attached to maybe my university who's got information. I've got maybe my extension agent. That would be amazing to have those people out there being utilized in the community. And we're crafting something together, and there's support in those structures.
Yeah. So three points. I think one is the first myth was go big. This also means go big and go alone and be competitive. That's sort of the old corn road, you know, fence row to fence row planning of commodities that came out of the 70s, right? And also the green revolution, but
which by definition means that our neighbors can't survive also.
Right.
By definition, if I go big, you can't also.
So we can't have zero sum in agriculture. So the other thing is farmers, beginner farmers or transition farmers need to be aware that they need to have a support network. And that runs a little bit counter to many farmers who the data shows they don't like to reach out for example, mental health resources. And then the other thing is, rather than prescriptive programs that are nationally based and require, and actually take away the choices, because you talk a lot about farming choices, that many farmers don't have choices. You know, they're sort of almost following these prescriptions. Rather than that, there needs to be more of a holistic assessment that's local and regional. And this, I think all these concepts really apply to transition to regenerative practices, because they're very complicated. So without the network, without the support, without the community, without the network, and also without the choices, that's never going to happen.
Yes. I mean, I think above all,
Did I
really,
summarize that
one of
okay?
my, I'd say so. Above all, I guess one of the take homes that I would love, you know, that I think is just not controversial too, because a lot of these topics, you start talking about them, half the room shut down, and you know, we talk about climate change or in the Iowa legislature, right? People are just like, nope, not talking about that. But when we're talking about alternatives and giving farmers opportunities to do different things, to actually make choices based on marketplace interaction, based on what's best for my land, like to be able to assess that and make decisions about what I'm planting is a very different thing than, you know, at the NRCS, it's like, oh, corn's up this year. So like that's what's on my conservation plan is now it's corn, now it's soybeans. There is no decision making in that. There is no weighing my options to think, oh, corn prices seem low. I'm betting too many people are going to plant this year. I'm going to go with oats. I'm going to go with, whatever it happens to be. And I just see that if we could even just frame it in that way of just more opportunities for farmers to make those decisions, whether it's apples or whatever you want to do, goats, we raise goats. It's going to benefit everybody because then we can reduce oversupply issues. We can have a diversity of products growing in our own backyards. We can give farmers the opportunity to make money on what they're growing by weighing the market and seeing what's an opportunity out there.
Fantastic. Yeah. I mean, choices would also inspire a new generation, right? More
Yeah.
choices. Open to the audience for questions. Tom, first up.
Beth, could you talk about the transition that you made towards organics in taking over the farm?
Yeah, so we now raise grass finished beef. We raise them their whole lives. We like to say grass finished because a lot of grass fed, if you look at the details, people are saying they have access to grass. It's like, come on. Okay, so we call that grass finished beef, and we raise goats outside on pasture and in forest mainly, and hay and vegetables, but not on a really large scale. So we thought initially like the organic route would be for us because we don't want to use chemicals. But we've just not ever, so when we went to our local USDA offices and started asking about organics, it's, moments in the book where people are just like, organics, like what, like not quite what is that, but no, there's no programs for organics. That's what we were told over and over. There's no organic programs per se. Okay, what does that mean? When there were, and there's a lot of things that are conservation programs that are great for organics. And so we ended up getting an organic transition plan that the USDA paid for. The woman came out a bunch of times. I mean, we talked a lot, but she didn't really ever get the, like, what did we want to do organically? So what ended up happening is that it's this big booklet with lots of different maps and I don't know, forms. I don't even know what's in there, sadly. But, and it's about like converting the land, but it didn't ever tell us about like, okay, what the cattle, like, what do we have to do to have the cattle certified, which is a whole different, set of forms and things that you have to have. So it just ended up being that no one's asked us for it. We haven't had any, there's been no like place that we would sell it that needs organic certification. So we actually haven't gone down the certification road when everything that we do is organic. We do use antibiotics when cattle need it or goats need it.
Yeah.
So we've not actually become certified.
And also you make the point that you have to have a market, and you're an hour from Des Moines. There's probably a market, but your best market may not be just specifically organic. So the
Yeah,
marketplace,
I
and also there's the fair cattle market.
Yeah, I mean, exactly. There's
Against the whole market that's now unlabeled as to country of origin. And so you've got to just get your product out there. But how do your customers recognize your product? Let's ask it another way.
I think that people, when it comes to meats, it seems like right now people are, if they're going to buy, they buy direct from farms. In Iowa, that is a big thing where you buy a quarter beef and you put it in your freezer and have it all year or however long. So those people are, I think, first wanting connection with farms.
Mhm.
That's their primary driver, like knowing the farmer.
Mm.
Number two, I think they are looking for regenerative practices. And I think, the book has definitely helped because it's all right here, how we farm. So people who read it contacted us and like, oh, we'd like to buy meat from you. So we haven't had, and the one wholesaler we sell to is now specializing. It's a company I talk about in there. They actually have gotten off the ground. It's called 99 Counties, which is the number of counties in Iowa. They are selling into markets like in Chicago and St. Louis and those kinds of places. And they want Iowa raised, on pasture, no grain, no chemicals. So it's
that famous steakhouse in Chicago, whatever that one is, where they sell the 48-ounce.
probably not,
The Iowa.
because most of the grass finished beef is not prime
Not quite that.
choice, cuts. Yeah, just question back there.
You talked a little about how when you got to the second part of the book, it was difficult for you to think of suggestions to make for like systemic change. I was just wondering, have you been able to think of anything like that we can change systemically?
Yeah, I guess I don't mean systemically as to like have a vision of what the perfect farm situation would be. So I think some of the changes that I've talked a lot about that is in the book, but I still think are really pressing things, is the way that the USDA offices are run, the actual staffing and the ability for those offices to be resources in the community, in the places where they are. Like landowners, farmers talk about people calling them and saying, oh, here's this great program. Do you want to do this? Let's work on your wetland. Like, and it's very proactive, as opposed to where we live, where we're on, I think, our 5th or 6th head of the NRCS in our county in the 5 years we've been there. So it's like a completely revolving door of people who, many of whom have not that much interest, or they're there very temporarily. So I think the kind of money for real training, real staffing, figuring out like computer issues that those people always have, the filling out 1 million checkbox forms and the ranking systems. And it's so cumbersome for those people. And there's just no incentive for them to sit down with the farm bill when it comes out and like, okay, I'm going to learn all of this. I'm going to really figure out what I can supply my county. That doesn't happen in most cases. So it takes, 3 years for the farm bill programs to really hit the ground in our county. And then they don't have the staffing that can actually handle it. So I'm going to throw that out as one of my systemic solutions.
No, that's a great idea. I was exasperated for you reading the encounters that you had trying to get resources and information, and it's a great structural systemic.
And I see what the USDA is going to now, what Vilsack answered questions about when I asked him directly about it, is that, well, we're going to go to this like service provider network. So the nonprofits and the universities, that's supposed to be now like the conduit for programs, which works in some cases and really doesn't work in a lot of cases. So, or it's going to be very specific slices of the pie again, like, oh, we work on cover crops, so we're just going to,
So the burden starts to flow over to the states to build out some and fill in some of those gaps. I think we have a question.
Hi, Beth. My name is Lindsay Samahan, and I work at the Kleinman Center for Energy Policy. And my background's in journalism too, and I'm actually interested in your time as a journalist and wonder if you can think back to some of the stories you wrote on these topics, maybe of agriculture or regenerative agriculture, if there's anything that stands out as kind of your favorite or most enlightening, kind of an aha moment that maybe helped bring you to where you are right now.
Well, the one that that Tom brought up about cooking with immigrant women in their homes, I had a grant to do that. I spent a year in Salt Lake City, and part of it was, you know, everyone's like, Salt Lake City, there's no diversity, and it's like, well, actually there is. And so it was, yeah, and it was I was part of another documentary project at the time that was documenting the west side of the city, is kind of the immigrant gateway, I guess you could say, of the city. And we'd go and interview people. And a lot of times it was a couple who came, and I would hear from the men. And I would then, you know, say like, oh, you know, can I come back and talk to you? Whatever her name was. And she would say like, oh, I don't have any stories. No, you know, I don't know. That's what he told the story. And so then I started trying to think about like, how can I get them to talk about, and it's through food, you know, even the people who weren't cooks or didn't feel like, you know, that was their job or whatever. That was still a story about why they didn't, you know, why they didn't know how to cook, or how they didn't learn how to cook because of whatever was going on in their country. And so that was one of my favorites. I also did a story on, well, I guess related to this, I did a story in Uganda about the first community, is a community-owned forest project that was receiving carbon credits. The first one in Africa was in this place in Uganda. And it was just fascinating. I mean, everything about it, from the fact that like we drive 2 minutes and it was a different language every like 5 minutes down the road, they spoke a different language. And then just like things about, well, why is this a eucalyptus forest? And this is like completely not native trees that soak up a lot of water. And then you're going to cut them down in 10 years. And how is that sequestering carbon? And just all the questions. And the whole community is like, when does our check start coming? You know, it was just the whole setup was fascinating. So thanks for asking.
In the back, and then over to you, Pete.
Hi, Beth. So I basically wanted to know, you mentioned about how there's a disconnect between consumers and farmers, and there hasn't been any specific program for organic. From a policy point of view, how do you position regenerative agriculture to be separate from the organic food which we get, so that we can actually promote regenerative agriculture from the consumer's point of view, and as well as help farmers?
Yeah, it's a good question. I mean, I think we were talking over the break about, you know, one of the ideas could be like LEED certification. We were just talking about where it's sort of like maybe even levels, where, you know, you have all those 5, 6 things that are part of regenerative agriculture. To do just one, you know, maybe that's like all you get to say about it. Because I hear a lot of times it's like, oh, we do regenerative ag. And it's like, well, what is that? It's just no-till. And that's just, you know, it's a baby step. But I think that if you had potentially, and I'm sure there's all sorts of problems with what I'm saying, and we could have lots of debate about how it would actually work. But as a USDA program, if I'm coming in as a farmer to enroll for a program, I could be starting, there could be different kind of levels of where I could come into what kind of incentives I could receive. It would also take away this whole idea of like and I'm forgetting, Jane, how it was phrased about people, what you already do, getting credits for early adopters, like getting money for programs that you're already doing. But I think that those people are potentially really rich environments that most of those farmers want to do more. I mean, as any of them, you could like ask and they'd have 15 more projects they would do if it would be funded. So you could have, the very end of that kind of scale where people are doing all of these regenerative things, but they're actually then could do more. The CSP program is supposed to be like that, but it doesn't, it's too prescriptive to really work in that fashion. So I don't know if that's answering it.
No, that's a great encapsulation. Excuse me, Pete, how are we for time, Dr. Parsons? Okay, so we'll finish at 5 of like a good class, so we get a little bit of a break. So we'll go another 6 minutes. We got more time for questions. Pete.
Thanks. Hi, Beth. Thank you. Pete Saris at the Kleinman Center. In terms of regenerative ag as sort of a climate strategy, right? And like any strategy and scaling that up, you have to go through early adopters before you get to that early majority. And I think any risk adverse industry, you have that early majority just kind of sitting back, waiting, making sure their neighbors' yields go up or their insurance goes down.
Yeah.
Do we need more carrots? Not like actual carrots, but metaphorical carrots and incentives. Because like we talk to the mining industry, they also don't think climate change is real until we present the business case. And they're like, oh, we can do something, So how do we present that? How do we present the business case, particularly as additionality and may change with market penetration?
Great questions. I guess just rephrase that one more time for me, because I just want to make sure that I'm understanding.
Sure. I think the point I see, or maybe the concern I have with the early majority weighting in this, and it's not just unique to regenerative agriculture, but as market penetration increases, right, the business case changes. And I think there's a calculus, and I can imagine farming is very calculating cost benefit. And you talked about educating sort of locally, but these are more global concepts in terms of how the market may change if you sit back. And so how can we as academics work to communicate those concepts to farmers?
To nudge them along,
Yeah.
so that to get it to the tipping point where they get beyond the fears of market competition and embrace transition. Is that
Right.
kind of what you're getting?
Yeah, and
Okay.
perhaps incentives kind of coming
With incentives or
that
otherwise.
forward too.
Oh, I mean, I think it's what's difficult about it is that, yes, incentives are incentivizing, right? If you're going to get money per acre to do something and it makes sense that it's more than you're paying for the thing, why not, right? So I think that equation is a real one that anybody, especially if you're trying to avoid risk, that if I think, okay, I'm going to put in this cover crop, it's going to cost me extra, but it's going to be covered, that gives you much more flexibility. I think there's no denying that. But I think that it becomes such an emphasis, like the Farm Bill, it ends up being like, that's kind of the compromise that comes out of all of the discussion is that, well, we've got to have those incentives. Okay, we'll have those incentives. And that's where a lot of the conversation stops. So I do think that it's a really important thing. And we've seen that definitely. I think if you talk to the practical farmers of Iowa, there is no denying that having farmers stand up in a panel talking about cover crops, honestly, the pros and the cons, who had higher yields, who didn't, who's done it for 5 years. That has huge effect on a crowd of farmers. That is undeniable. And I think that could be that we need kind of more of that, you know, because there is that whole looking over the. I think all of our neighbors looked at us at first like, what are they doing? You know, why would you finish cattle on grass? And then, oh, lo and behold, we've had some droughts. Who has grass? We have grass. We have tons of hay. And so it might take that little bit of time. I don't know that any of our neighbors are then going to also be finishing on grass because they don't have the market. The market system isn't set up. So unfortunately, all of those carrots have to work together in a sense where you have the carrot for the actual process, so in the field, planting, whatever it is, but there has to be a carrot of somewhat ease of market so it can get out the door. I mean, I think that's a lot of what I talk about in the book is just, why would you not grow a crop that is basically, it's insured. I just drive into my seed dealer, they hand me all the stuff, the sprayer guy comes, I can harvest it easily, I put it in the truck and it's gone, and I get a check, regardless of how much
Right.
I've yielded.
Even if it freezes you're still gonna get a
Like,
check.
why would I not do that? So some of the parts have to be easier in order to encourage people to do something different. You can't, what we have to deal with now is that every part of it, we have to invent. We have to go look for the information about what we're doing. We have to seek out seed dealers that will have the right kinds of seeds. You have to find the market. You have to have the website. You got to blog about it. You got, you know, and it's and then it can make you really tired.
One more question, Ellen. I'm sorry, I think we're going to be out of time. So we'll end with Ellen's question and I'll.
I just wanted to mention that another solution that I thought you told me about was that at the Practical Farmers of Iowa, their alternative model to, you know, Monsanto funding the research at a university is to have the farmers talk to each other about what do we want to learn this year, and then there is a research team that responds to the most popular questions that people want to know the answer to. And I think that seemed like it really addressed some of the things that Jane was talking about. If we could scale up our ability to take questions from farmers and do some of that translational work. What do you think about that?
Yeah. I mean, that's an incredible, it's called the cooperators. We can get together and figure out, it's over like 2-3 days. The farmers are there, figure out what topics they want to research, they want to know more about. It spans everything. And then there's a bunch of researchers, scientists, people, and then staff people who are also kind of manage the whole thing for Practical Farmers. And the Laura Jacksons and those people are there, you know, kind of coming to see like, okay, well, what do people want to know about? And it's an incredible thing to have that. And if we had $25 million to facilitate that kind of research, wow, we could really change things. But
So well curated, data-driven, crowdsourced.
Yeah.
Farmer from the ground up. Yeah, it'd be incredibly valuable. I think we'll have to take a break here, but we want to thank Beth for absolutely wonderful conversation, for engaging the participants, and for your absolutely phenomenal book, and for the symposium, for offering the book, and all the information that's in here. It is a beautiful book. It's well written, and captures a lot of the things and more that we've talked about. So thank you so much.
thank you all.
Okay, so